King David has died, and now his son, King Solomon, sits on the throne of Israel. And it seems like Solomon is going to follow in the footsteps of his father. He makes a lot of sacrifices. He's attempting to be in relationship with the God of Israel as David was. Now, there are the seeds of disaster planted even in this text, because David seems to have a propensity to worship other gods too, and that will become a problem by the end of his reign. But for now, he's kind of on a straight track. And he's gone in our text today to sort of go and make a sacrifice, to go up to the high place, one apparently dedicated to the God of Israel, and offer a bunch of sacrifices as was his custom. And that night, as he falls asleep, God comes to him in a dream. And God says, "Solomon, ask what it is that you would like, and I will grant your request." It's a wide open question that Solomon could go any direction with. And Solomon actually begins with a little prelude. He begins by saying how grateful Solomon is to God. He thanks God for being there with his steadfast love throughout David's reign, which, as we saw through the month of July, had lots of up and downs and was full of some pretty grievous mistakes. But God's mercy never ended for David. And Solomon steps into that and prays that the God of Israel will continue that mercy and steadfast love to him. And throughout this, Solomon refers to himself and his father as servants of God. He understands that they serve as regents of the God who is really King of Israel. And all of that gratitude for God being present to his father, for God being present to him, and for where he sits on the throne now, makes Solomon sort of feel inadequate. He says, "I'm only a little child. I don't know how to go out or come in." Which really Solomon's an adult, but he feels like he's been placed on a very large throne with very large shoes to fill. And going out and coming in is both this sort of shepherding metaphor that he's unsure how to guide people, and it becomes a military metaphor. He actually doesn't have a whole lot of experience in that. So he's not sure what to do with what he's been given, but he wants to do it well. And so after saying all that, he says, "Okay, here's my request. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil." And you can kind of imagine God smiling, because God is really pleased with the request that Solomon has made. I mean, Solomon could have asked for a lot of stuff, like a peaceful reign, and no rebellions, and no more siblings doing dangerous and terrible things. That was last week's story. And for peace and prosperity and for a good legacy. But that's not what Solomon asks for. Solomon looks deep within and sees his own sort of need for something more to govern the people. And so that's what he asks God for. It comes down to as sort of the wisdom of Solomon, right? People not even in churchy world know about the wisdom of Solomon that God grants. Because God does grant him a kind of wisdom. And Solomon, though, is very intelligent in asking for this. He sees that the ability to discern between good and evil is sometimes difficult. That life is mostly a bunch of gray. And especially when it comes to governance. The gray is all over the place. To go to war or not go to war. What policy is best for all people? How to live best in the law of God. So what Solomon asks for is not intelligence. He already has plenty of smarts. What he asks for is wisdom, which is different. Our translation says that what he asks for is a understanding mind. And I think when we hear that, it makes us think of the brain. And so we think of discursive things, logic, and he wants to know all about ethics, but that's not really it. The Hebrew says that he asks particularly for a hearing heart. And perhaps the translation choice is made because heart sounds like some sort of seat of emotion in our world, but it's not. Whether you go with discerning mind or hearing heart, what Solomon asks for is a deep-seated wisdom from someplace in his core. from some place in his heart center. It's not acquiring more intellect. It's about acquiring the ability to hear and to listen and to really discern what is good and what is evil. To go beyond all the cacophonous noise around him. To shut it all out. To shut out his own monkey mind and to be able to listen in his deeper space for how God is speaking about what is good and about what is evil, and to know deeply what the difference is. The heart center really is where empathy lives. It's where compassion lies. It's where we develop the ability to do this churchy word discernment, which is really clarity about the way I should go in life. How is it that I should be? Where is it I should go? What is it that is my life's central calling from a soul deep place, not from my rational mind? It's a totally different set of way of being in the world. That's what Solomon requests. The ability to drop all the rest away and to descend into this place where he knows how to listen for God. And that when he doesn't get it right, he learns to listen to his mistakes and grow from them. That part of a hearing heart is a willingness to be changed by what happens to you. To learn from the errors, to grow and to develop. And that's how wisdom arises. It's not the work of a moment, it's the work of a lifetime. A lifetime of learning to listen for God, of learning to listen to ourselves, and to learning to listen to others from a place of empathy, from a place of compassion, from a place of willing to be moved by the other, whether that is God, ourself that's less known to us, or another person. This is what Solomon requests, because he knows it's possible to move through life and never touch one's heart. That it's possible to have a lot of answers about a lot of things. Solomon could have just asked, could you please fill me with all the wisdom and insight of Aristotle, Kant, Rawls, all of these people before, time immemorial. That's not what he asks for, is it? Because he's not asking for something of the head. He's asking to know deep within. It's a different way of knowing. It's a different way of moving in the world that grants a different kind of peace. It helps us look at the world and cut through the gray to really discern who we are and what we're about and where God is in us and where God is in others. And when we do that, good and evil become a little clearer. We're sure about our path. We're better able to listen to others and hold space so maybe they can discover theirs. That's what it's really about. And that's the invitation of the spiritual life, really, to develop a hearing heart. It's not about learning more. It's not about following the rules. It's not about having a right answer. It's about learning to hear rightly, to discern with wisdom. And it's really the work of a lifetime. You could call it the spiritual journey. You can call it the invitation of Jesus. You can call it living with the Holy Spirit. However you name it, all of those things are true. That's what the invitation is. And Solomon, of course, asks for it so he can govern well. And it's worthy of thought whether we should consider that in who we choose as our leaders, who will govern us. But the invitation is really for everyone. That developing a hearing heart is possible for all people. That's the invitation from God. That's how we really birth wisdom into the world. That's how we live from a place of truth and authenticity. It's how we are empathetic and compassionate to one another. We may not have the power of Solomon or even of an elected official, but we can bring that kind of goodness, that kind of discernment, that kind of wisdom to bear in our own spheres of the world, to make the world a more empathetic place, to help us make wiser decisions that impact our relationships and other relationships. That's the journey. To fine-tune our hearts, to learn and grow and change. May God grant to us, as God granted to Solomon, a hearing heart.